the first saying from the cross, Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they're doing. Jesus says this about the people who have nailed him stark naked to a piece of wood. This is a form of abuse and torture which helps us to understand just what sort of evil Jesus was up against. And he remarkably prays to God for the forgiveness of those who are hurting him. And it's a truly wonderful thing, forgiveness. It's an amazing experience to be forgiven. I'm sure we've all done things and hurt people we love and hurt people that perhaps we don't like so much. And when they have turned and forgiven us, it has been a liberating experience. But I want to give you a word of warning. In Matthew's Gospel, in chapter 18, Peter asked Jesus how many times he should forgive somebody. And Jesus effectively says, it's unlimited. Doesn't matter how many times they come to you and say sorry, you have got to forgive them. And that requirement of Jesus on Christians to forgive is something that has created a problem, because victims of abuse and victims of injustice have often felt pressurized in Christian communities to forgive the people who've done these awful things to them, even when they have not been asked for forgiveness. And it is this that I want to focus on, because although Jesus forgives somebody even though they're not requesting it, he has never asked Christians to forgive somebody if that person doesn't want to be forgiven. We shouldn't use Jesus' amazing example of unlimited love on the cross to make the life of people who have been persecuted or abused even worse by telling them what they should do. Those of us who've been on the nasty end of unpleasant behaviour have already experienced some fairly unpleasant emotions, and actually simply to tell the thing again means you have to relive it. So the requirement to forgive has a caveat. The person who might be forgiven needs to want it. Now, I don't know what those soldiers said to Jesus while they were banging nails through his wrists and hands. We're not told. We do know that they mocked him, but we do know that they also experienced some sense of awe and wonder at the way he died. So we have to make the assumption that Jesus did this so that those of us in later generations would be inspired to new levels of forgiveness. But we also do need to remember the victims, those who for very good reason are unable to forgive at the moment. So let's pray that we may know forgiveness, that we may never use that as a way of adding to other people's hurt, and that we may look to Jesus for our own forgiveness. Jesus who forgives the most appalling crimes against him, and the God who is always there waiting to forgive will enrich us and bless us through Jesus' example. Truly I say to you, today you will be with me in paradise. This is another one of those very gentle sayings, and you'll find that these gentle sayings are in Luke's Gospel. He has a particular concern for the underprivileged, for the undervalued, and he presents Jesus as a very, very gentle person. So when he has a conversation with the two thieves who are being crucified either side of him, he has some very comforting things to say. In Matthew and Mark's Gospel, the thieves are just pictured as hurling abuse at him like everybody else. But in Luke's Gospel, one of them says, save yourself and us. And the other one says, well, hang on a minute, we're guilty. This man has done nothing. And therefore, he then turns to Jesus and says, look, remember me when you come into your kingdom. And Jesus replies, today you will be with me in paradise. And that word today is significant because we live in a temporal world. Time and space are intimately bound up, and Einstein was obviously right in his calculations. And so we cannot understand eternity in any other way than just a very long time. And so here we are on earth waiting for the conclusion of our lives or whatever it is we're looking forward to. And this sense that eternity is out there is difficult for us to get our heads around. And the way I like to think of it is that eternity is the divine present. There is no past or future in eternity. Everything is present. And so when Jesus says today, he means today on the other side of death. Today when we have passed out of this temporal world in which we live. So that is cause for hope for all of us. If we're in the middle of this life and enjoying ourselves, then we can sort of perhaps put that to one side. But here we are in the middle of a pandemic lockdown, and our mortality is far more real than it has been recently. So that word today helps us to put all of this in the context of eternity. Whatever happens to us, whether we live or die or suffer or live long or live short or whatever it is, there is a sense in which each moment, each present moment, is a snapshot of eternity. And so when the thief turns to Jesus and says, Lord, remember me, at that moment he is experiencing what is to come. And what is to come is today, the present. Forgiveness now and forever. Christians obviously believe that Jesus rose from the dead, and that is like the key to this making any sense at all. And so not only do we think about Jesus suffering today, we also think about what's coming on Sunday. And it's in that light that Jesus, today you will be with me in paradise, is something that we really need to hold on to. And paradise has a long history in Jewish and Christian and Muslim traditions, because the paradise was a garden, and the garden reminds us of the Garden of Eden, the original paradise, the original place that God intended for humanity. And Jesus presents to the thief, that's what's coming. That's how we're all going to be together in this wonderful garden paradise. Not like this garden, we won't be surrounded by all these thorns and nasty things like that. It took my finger out the other day. So let's just look forward with Jesus to this place, this eternal present, where paradise is there and we are all together in that paradise. Woman, behold your son. Behold your mother. One of the most tragic things about the crucifixion is who had to watch. There were a number of people there at the bottom of the cross looking up at Jesus, and one of them was his mother. Now, I've taken a lot of funerals in my time, and the ones that are by far the hardest are the funerals of children. Nobody should have to see their child die. It's every parent's nightmare, isn't it? And Mary had to stand and watch while her son gasped for breath in agony, naked, for hours. She could do nothing to stop it. She could do nothing to relieve his pain, even if she tried. I suspect they would have tried to have stopped her. I read a meditation many years ago from somebody who did a piece of work with people where you had to imagine you were at the crucifixion and you had to imagine what you did. And this person, she said that most of the male participants imagine themselves slinking away, unable to face the sight. And most of the female participants imagine themselves trying to tear Jesus down from the cross. And of course Mary, Jesus' mother, doesn't do either of those things. She doesn't slink away and she doesn't try and tear him down. She stands and she watches. And we cast our mind back to when Jesus was 40 days old and Joseph and Mary took him to the temple, and ancient Simeon said to Mary that Jesus would be really important, and then he said to her, and a sword will pierce your own soul too. And it seems to me that those hours that she stood at the foot of her son's cross watching him in torture was the point where that sword went through her soul. Mary is unique, not because she's ontologically different or anything like that. She's human. But she's unique because she's the only human who was there when Jesus was born, when he died, when he rose again, and when the Spirit was given sometime later. So we honour Mary partly because she's the only one who saw it all through, and partly because she was the one who suffered the most on Jesus' behalf. So let's just spare a moment for all those parents who have seen their children die, for those parents whose children have been taken from them by illness, those whose children have been murdered, those who have been killed in war or famine. And let us bring them before God, along with Mary, the one who perhaps understands more than any other human being what it means to see the Son of God die on a cross. But of course what Jesus does from the cross is he provides for her. John, the beloved disciple, is the one of his disciples who's still there. And when Jesus says to Mary, look, here is your son, and to the disciple, here is your mother, he's not just doing something nice, he's actually making an economic situation better for Mary. Because one of the roles of the child was to make sure that their father and mother were looked after in their old age. That commandment in the Ten Commandments, honour your father and mother, is not addressed to children. It's addressed to people like me, people with elderly parents. Do not forsake your parents when they get old, is effectively what that's about. And of course, Jesus on the cross will not be able to look after his mother because he's going to die. And so he puts upon John that role. Woman, behold your son. This is the one who will see you into your old age. John, behold your mother. I require you to look after her. So John had a unique role to play with Mary, and we thank God for that. And we thank God that Jesus, in the middle of his agony and torture, was able to look out for his mum, the person that he had a responsibility for. my God, why have you forsaken me? This is what's called the cry of dereliction, the fourth word from the cross. And I want to pick up really on some of the things I was saying on Palm Sunday, because this is the cry that gives us permission to cry as well. Now, Jesus is actually quoting Psalm 22, verse 1. We had it earlier on in this service. And in that cry, my God, why have you forsaken me? Jesus isn't pretending to be forsaken. He is really experiencing what it means to be human, to be alone. Because one of the things is one of these theological conundrums is, how is it that God can understand where we're coming from? Because God can't die. God is eternal. God can do anything. We had Psalm 102 earlier on this week, and in it the psalmist is going, well, it's all right for you, God, you live forever, we'll wear out like old garments. And there is a sense in which before Jesus we didn't have that confidence that God got it. And it's something that those who have experienced pain and suffering keep saying. Do you get it? Do you understand just what it's like to face death, to face crushing, to face despondency and despair? Now, people would say, oh yeah, but if you follow that argument to its logical end, nobody can understand anybody. I don't buy that, because there is a sense in which there's got to be some common ground for there to be communication. And if Jesus didn't experience proper dereliction, proper worry, proper fear of death, proper darkness, he would be of no use to us. He wouldn't understand what it's like to be you and me. But he did. He faced death. He looked down the barrel of that gun that's pointing at all of us. And we can never say, oh, I'm going to be all right, I'm going to be faithful to God, until we've actually travelled that path ourselves. And nobody can walk it for us. When I was a child, I used to be really scared about dying. I used to worry about getting lost, because it must be very big on the other side of death. But actually, even now, I don't think I could honestly say, heart of heart, I'm not afraid of dying. It's something that is still a mystery. I've not been there. I've not travelled that path yet, but I know I'm going to. And the fact that Jesus, when he was travelling that path, said to God, why have you forsaken me, means that if I get to that point when I don't think that God is there, I've got that crumb of comfort to hang on to. There's a reason why Christians look to crucifixes when they're getting very sick or dying. It's because that is the image of the God who is there and has already walked that path. And if he's already walked that path, then we've got a little bit of hope that there's a light at the end of the tunnel. Again, these are just the musings of me at this stage in my life. And it's possible that when the chips are down, I may rue those words. But I will try to remember those words. My God, why have you forsaken me? They may or may not be true. One of the great ironies of the book of Job, Job spends 30 odd chapters moaning at his friends about how bad life is for him and how he wished he could have a chat to God about it. And then God turns up at the end and says, well, what are you talking about? And the great sort of irony of that is that God's been listening in. He's been there all along, even though Job didn't know it. So I suspect that even if I do say, my God, why have you forsaken me? He's probably there. Just, I can't see him. And from my point of view, well, that's what matters. But we keep going. we keep going to the end of the road to see what happens next. The fifth word of Jesus from the cross, I'm thirsty, is only reported in John's Gospel. And it is a sign of Jesus' humanity. We've just had the fourth word, the cry of dereliction, and that really is about Jesus being human. But this extra one about Jesus' humanity, I am thirsty, is, for John, it's a bit embarrassing. Because for John, Jesus is beyond temptation. This is his moment of glory on the cross. And yet he has reported that he was thirsty. According to Matthew, Mark and Luke, Jesus was offered something to drink with a drug in it when he was about to be crucified, and he refused to take it. But now he does take sour wine. Probably not drugged, but even if it had not been drugged, if it was wine, it would have had a certain soporific effect. And so John tries to play down the humanity by referring to the scripture and says he said this in order to fulfill the scripture. And I suspect it may be something to do with Psalm 69, where the psalmist says, when I was thirsty they gave me vinegar to drink. So if that's what John thinks, and the witness that that's what Jesus said is reporting it accurately, it's possible that John is avoiding the harsh reality, which is that if God became human, then he's not going to look very godlike. How can God be thirsty? Doesn't make sense. And yet here is Jesus, being human, needing a drink. I suspect he would have been very, very thirsty. If Matthew, Mark and Luke are to be believed, he was on the cross from 9 o'clock in the morning till 3 o'clock in the afternoon. If John is to be believed, he was on the cross from 12 until 3. Either way, it is several hours without a drink, potentially in the heat of the day, in the direct sun. And so he would have become dehydrated. So we can use this phrase, I am thirsty, in one of two ways. We can use it to focus on Jesus' humanity, that he was somebody who went through that for you and me. Or we can use it, as John does, to focus on how he is fulfilling this pattern of behaviour of godlike people. The psalmist writes about how he had been persecuted. The prophets write about how they were persecuted. And you get this sense of this repeating process, that people who are neglected, not given the daily things they need, food, drink, shelter. I was thirsty and you did not visit me. That's something that Jesus identifies with. It's something that Jesus brings to the table. So, as we see Jesus being thirsty, let us also remember all the others in our own world who are thirsty. Those who don't have enough water to live with. Those who do not have the necessities of life. Those, like Jesus, who are deprived of things in order to torture them. These are people who are out there, and we need to pray for them. We need to think about them. We need to spend some of our time thinking about how they're spending their time. The sixth word of Jesus from the cross, "It is finished," is a word that can be taken in one of two ways. There's the way that John takes it. For John, this is a triumphant cry. It is a cry of Jesus saying, "Look, I've done everything that the Father sent me to do. I have been glorified here on the cross. I have glorified the Father by doing what he said. I have glorified myself by accomplishing this great salvation for the world." And there's a sense in which we get that meaning in English as well. Last summer we had the triumphant opening of the new building at St George's, and it was an extension that took 20 years out of my life, one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. And so that day was a day of great joy and pride in achieving something that was very, very hard. And that sense of "it is finished," I think we can all understand. I mean, even President Kennedy had that sense of, when he was starting off the moon landings, we go to the moon not because it's easy, but because it's hard. Things that are worth doing have value because it was difficult getting there. And so all of that is bound up in this one short phrase of Jesus from the cross: "It is finished." But there is another meaning to it. You see, the phrase "it is finished" in English is ambiguous. It's also ambiguous in Hebrew. Now, Jesus spoke Aramaic, and it's possible maybe it was ambiguous in Aramaic as well. It probably was. And in Hebrew, in the Psalms in particular, it's used as a curse. So when the psalmist wants to pray to God against his enemies, one of the things he says is, destroy them, whatever it is, finish them off. It's the same word. And it's possible that when Jesus actually said, "It is finished," it could have been a reflection of the fourth word, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Yeah, that's it. I've had enough. I'm done in. It's all over. There's nothing more I can do. I'm going to die. We'll never know what was going through Jesus' mind as he said those words. John has taken it in a particular way. But I'd like to offer that choice to you as you think about these words. Which way do you imagine Jesus meant them? Was it another cry of dereliction? Or was it a cry of victory? The choice is yours. The last word from the cross, like the cry of dereliction, the fourth one, is another quotation from the Psalms. "Father, into your hands I commend my spirit." You'll find it in Psalm 31. Psalm 31 is actually a lament psalm. It's one of those passages where we can be completely honest with God, that sometimes we feel as though we are completely in the dark. And as we've just heard with the sixth saying of Jesus, it's possible that instead of that word "it is finished" being a triumphant cry, it could have been the cry of despair. I give up, I give in, I'm all in. So when Jesus says, "Father, into your hands I commend my spirit," we have another choice. We can take it in the sense that probably Luke intended, because this one's only in Luke's Gospel, that Jesus was in a loving relationship with his Father, and even at that point of death he was able to trust in God, that God would look after him. "Father, I place into your hands," that idea of being cocooned, looked after, cared for. We all know what it's like to be cuddled as children by our parents or by those looking after us. And one of the tragedies, of course, of being an adult is that you sometimes forget what that feels like. And so the fact that Jesus was still able to evoke that, even at the point of his death, is, I think, a cause for great hope. That for some of us, the process of death will be like leaning back into the most comfortable armchair you could ever imagine, one that is like being held in a loving parent's hands. That's a wonderful human experience, and I certainly pray that it is something that we all experience when we come to our final hours. And as we think about the number of people in hospital beds at the moment, and we think about those who are caring for them at the point of death, those people who are beautiful and wonderful people, who are being the hands that hold people as they go through that last journey, they are invaluable. And then there's the other meaning. Father, into your hands I commend my spirit, again, because there is no one else I can turn to. There is nobody here. Many of us have never experienced that sort of love. It's a tragic truth of our time. And so this saying can work in that way as well, that the person who is on their own can still pray this prayer. It may not have the comfy, rosy feel to it that I've just described, but it is still a valid prayer. The prayer of the psalmist, the prayer of the lament. Father, everything's on top of me. I can't stand it. Everybody's getting at me. I place my spirit into your hands. I do not know what else I can do. So I leave you with that choice, as with the previous word, about how you read this, how you hear it, how it speaks to you. Because on this day, when Jesus died, when he went to torture and abuse and death, when he was willing to do that so that you and I could have a different type of relationship with God. This final word, a word that can speak to either hope or despair, is something that we can all pray. Father, into your hands I commend my spirit. Amen.